Some of you may be watching this channel for the very first time, and this may be the very first episode of this channel you ever see. And you have to know, this is not my first rodeo. I have been having these experiences since I was a little kid. In fact, I made a movie in 2017 that was released in 2018 called But Something Is There. And it's available on this channel. You can watch it in the movie section. I also wrote a book by the same title, But Something Is There, that's available on Amazon. But to make a long story short, I've been having these experiences since I can remember. And I've written about them, and I've done major artwork on it, which was featured in many venues, from television to books to lectures by Yvonne Smith and Whitley Strieber and more during the 1990s, where I was on television a great deal talking about my experiences, which gave me a lot of trouble with my career and family and friends, as you might well imagine. After I got out of high school, things really quieted down. There was a period there where I went to work at the American Zoetrope, became friends with Francis Coppola and the people there, and worked on movies, and eventually came to LA, where I had a career as a special makeup effects artist, creature maker, and also a filmmaker. I produced a film that I wrote called The Day Time Ended. I did a lot of work in the industry, and during that time, things were pretty quiet, and that is up until about 1976, 1977, right in there when things started to get weird. About 1976, I went to work for a low-budget film company that Charles Band was the owner of, and one of the first movies that I did for him was Laser Blast, where I actually appeared as an alien in the film in the beginning and did the makeup effects and a lot of visual effects for. And I had been writing a screenplay that he took an interest in, and he read it and he liked the idea, but he asked me to come up with something else. So I went home and I wrote a page and a half. That became Vortex, which eventually became The Day Time Ended, which got produced as a film and released in theaters back in 1978, I believe, maybe. Well, no, it was actually 1980 by the time it got released. It had Jim Davis and Dorothy Malone and a lot of other really cool people in it. I worked on the visual effects and I did producing on it. While I was writing the screenplay with a friend of mine at the house I lived in North Hollywood, something really strange happened that night. I was sitting there and we were having a nice conversation about the script, which direction we would go in, and what we needed to do. And I was sort of thinking, and I looked back over at my friend and I saw his head go down. I thought, that's odd. We're in the middle of a conversation. What, is he tired? So I went over to him and I couldn't wake him up. And then I got this weird sense. It got really quiet. And I heard this voice in my head. And it said, go outside. You need to go outside. So I went outside, and what I saw amazed me. The street was quiet. There were no cars going by. It was just this deathly silence, and up above was this large saucer moving along very slowly, lit up a bit, and it moved across the sky, and I watched it. It was about that time I noticed something to my right, in my peripheral vision, moving. And I looked down the sidewalk, and what was coming towards me were three little creatures with big black eyes. They kept coming closer and closer, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting in my chair again in the living room. And my friend was awake. And I lost my train of thought. And I had this memory that this had happened, that something really weird had happened. And then I kept dreaming about it. All I could figure from what happened was that some sort of weird dream or something like that happened to me, and I fell asleep and he fell asleep, and I just didn't know what to make of it. Because keep in mind, communion hadn't come out yet. So as far as I was concerned, yes, I've been seeing UFOs all my life, but seeing the creatures and seeing the big craft over the top of the street and over my lawn and over to one side the way I did, I thought that just had to be some kind of weird, powerful dream I had. It wouldn't be till much later on that I would understand what had actually happened. So the big question is, did the beings have an influence on the screenplay we were writing? Watch the film, you be the judge. I looked at it recently, and all the influences that I know were there as they are today. Also, during that same period, I was working on Star Trek the Motion Picture. I was doing Spock's ears and some aliens for the movie. At the same time, I was working on effects for The Day Time Ended. It was an amazing period in my life, really. I mean, here I was working on Star Trek and working with Gene Roddenberry and Leonard Nimoy and all those wonderful people. But at the same time, there were some really odd things going on. I eventually moved from that house to Toluca Lake and rented an apartment. And it was at this apartment that things started to get kind of weird. One night I was inside my apartment, I was watching television, and there was a banging on my door. There were two people outside and they were frantic to get in. I opened the door up and it was two girls I knew that I had been going out with, and they came in all excited. And they say, "You never believe what we just saw. I mean, you were always talking about UFOs, but we really never believed you. But we're in the neighborhood just on the other side of you, and we saw this black object, and it was slowly moving down the street. It moved down the street, and we followed it, and it had light coming out from underneath it, and they tried to get neighbors interested in looking at it, and they had no interest in seeing it at all. And one person watering the lawn looked up and said, 'Oh yeah, how about that?' It was just a really odd thing to have happen. Then it moved over across the freeway in the direction of my apartment. So they went to my apartment to tell me what they had saw and shared it with me. But when they got to my apartment, it was hovering over my apartment. And they looked at it and it moved a bit and the light shined around and then it suddenly just vanished. And that's what prompted them to go and bang on my door. And they were afraid. You could tell they were afraid, and you could tell they weren't laughing at me anymore. Also during that time, there were other odd events going on. My friends were reporting flashes of light in the sky. One friend was in the restaurant down the street and all the power went off and lights flickered, and they went out into the parking lot and they saw a round circular object over the parking lot with a bright light on it. It was really busy. So one night, my friend Ricky, who I worked with in the special effects makeup industry and film, came over with our dates. I mean, mind you, I was in my mid-20s and I was single and we were going out a lot. So Ricky brought over our dates, and I told him to sit tight, watch television. I wanted to, change my clothes, get ready, because they came over kind of early. And I was in the bedroom. And as I'm putting my clothes on, buttoning up my shirt, I heard a voice again. And it said, "Go to the window. Go to the window and you'll see something special," or something like that. "You'll see something really amazing." So I walk over to the window and I look, and there's this bright light in the sky and it's moving oddly. Now keep in mind, I'm an aviator. I'm involved in aerospace and aviation and flying airplanes and all this kind of stuff. So I know my aircraft, and this thing had no anti-collision lights. It had no nav lights, and it was moving in a very odd manner. And I really wanted to know what it was. So I went out and I said, "Hey, come look at this." And the two girls and Ricky came into the window and looked at it and were watching it and saying, "What is that? Is that a plane? What the heck is that?" So I said, look, you guys stay here because I'm going to run outside, run downstairs and see if I can hear a sound from it, because in the apartment I couldn't tell. So I ran outside and it was gone. So I ran back up and I came in and they both turned, all three of them turned and looked at me, and they were white. They were just pale. And they said, you're not going to believe what we just saw. We didn't need to see this. You needed to see this. I said, well, what happened? They said, while they were watching it, it broke into two objects and shot straight up into the sky. That whole evening at dinner and the rest of the night was spent talking about what we had just seen. And the two girls were very, very frightened. They were scared. They thought that UFOs and all that stuff was just crazy stuff, and here they had seen it. And Ricky didn't know what to make of it. I got home around 2 in the morning, and I went into the kitchen and I was staring out the window. The lights were off, and I'm looking up at the sky. I saw a huge, huge explosion of light. It lit up like daylight, but it was sort of a bluish white color. It was completely silent. And then I noticed some flickering behind me, and I looked up, and the neon light in my kitchen was flickering. And I looked out in the courtyard, and all the neon lights in the courtyard, which were off, were all flickering. So there had been some huge electrostatic discharge. And to this day, I still believe that that discharge came from those same objects. I didn't stay at that apartment very long. And later on that year, I ran into some friends in the industry, and I rented a house from them in Burbank. And this was a big house, and it was nice. And I had it all to myself, and I set up a nice laboratory there. And I was making creatures and doing makeup prosthetics for horror films and for sci-fi films, and even a documentary on UFOs where I made some amazing looking gray aliens without the black eyes at that time. I did a Travis Walton mask during that time. I did that just for the fun of it, and I was working on all that stuff there alone. And somewhere around that time, I decided to get something I always wanted, and that was a Celestron C8 telescope. This was a very, very nice telescope, and it had an 8-inch aperture on it, or 8-inch mirror, and I could do astrophotography, and I've always wanted to do this since I was in high school. I'd always been obsessed with astronomy and watching the skies. And also at that same time, a dear friend of mine, also working in the industry with me, was an amateur astronomer, and he also bought one. And being that I had a big backyard and it was up in the Burbank Hills, the seeing wasn't that bad. You could see fairly well. It wasn't great, but it was a great testing ground for our scopes. So one night we set them up in the backyard. So while we were both working on our telescopes, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. It was a bright light moving along the hills of Burbank there. And it caught my attention. I looked at it, and again, there were no anti-collision lights, there were no nav lights, there was nothing to give it away as an airplane, and it just moved very oddly. For some reason, UFOs, even though they might be moving in a very straight line, they have this sort of wobble to them, this feeling of a sense that they're just not anything of ours. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, come over here, come close, I want to get a good look at you. And it wasn't very long, and suddenly it started to change direction, and it started coming towards us. It came directly into our backyard. It came over the top of the house next door and came straight into the backyard. And I remember thinking, my God, it was just an exasperating moment. It was amazing. And it came right at me. And my friend just stood there motionless, like he was in a state of shock. He didn't even move. And it came over to me, and it was a round sphere, and it was white and glowing. And it made this sort of electronic sound. I can't explain the sound or describe it. It was kind of it almost sounded like a percussion, electronic percussion. And it made this sound, and I started seeing images on it, and then suddenly one of them became what we know today as a gray, and it was looking directly at me. And it kept getting closer and closer, and something just compelled me to reach out and put my hands on it, and I did. And as I did, I felt this energy going all through me. It wasn't like an electrical shock, but my whole body buzzed and just, it wasn't an unpleasant feeling. And then the next thing I knew, my friend and I were standing there in the backyard. That was it. I had no other memory of what happened. And in fact, I always meant to have Yvonne do a session on that. But again, this was back in 1978. And this was pre-communion, and my memory of it that I had, again, I figured it was some kind of powerful dream. But by this point, I'm having lots of these powerful dreams. And in fact, when I first came to that house, there was these bright blue flashes in the sky. And they were happening on the edge of the horizon mainly, and they were all over the place. Some of my friends saw them, and later on, after I met my late wife and we moved to Granada Hills, we would see them up there all the time, and my friend Craig would see them with me quite often. They were perfectly clear nights. There were no thunderstorms. It was in summer, and they were blue-white. They were really, really something. What this is all leading up to is probably one of the biggest moments in my life. Everybody's had them, and this was mine. Shortly after this all happened in the backyard with my friend in the telescopes at night, I met a girl. Her name was Judy, and we just really liked each other. We fell in love, and she moved in, but we didn't have really the same interests. It was an interesting relationship, but she was really easygoing, and she was beautiful. She made fun of me, but not mean. She made fun of my interest in UFOs because I was writing this story for a script. Because with the success of The Day Time Ended, I wanted to write another screenplay. And this screenplay, ironically, was about a guy who believed that he had been an alien in his past life. And he found this out by going into deep meditation, and he connected with his self from being an alien. And he connected with it so deeply that it released a lot of secrets, like the secrets to anti-gravity and unlimited power. He also was a scientist, and so he started developing things that would have taken us out of this era we're in right now of being dependent on fossil fuel. And so I'm writing this story, and she's having a good giggle over it, humoring me about it, and she was great. But we just, you know, to her that stuff was, who knows, maybe. I was working on a film called Battle Beyond the Stars for Roger Corman. I had done a number of films for Roger Corman in my career, and this was a pretty big deal. It had huge stars in it, and it was kind of his answer to Star Wars. So of course I was hired to do what else? Aliens and creatures. This would lead to a lot of other films with aliens and creatures for Roger. And the film had recently been finished, and there was a premiere scheduled for it. And the premiere was very early in the morning and down at New World Studios, as I recall, or maybe it was at another theater nearby, but I remember it being very early, and I had to get up early. That night I went out with a friend who worked on the film with me, and we were celebrating the end of the film and the film being finished and the premiere the next day. And I got home very late, and I found a message on my phone machine, and it was from Judy, checking on me to see how I am, and that she was going to spend the night at a girlfriend's house. And that was the last time I ever heard from her. She was 24, I was 26. I went to sleep that night because I wanted to get to bed early enough to be well rested for getting up early and going to the premiere. And I reckon it was about 6:30 or so when I woke up in the morning. But before I woke up, I had this amazing dream. I just found myself floating through this cloud. I was like, I felt out of my body. I felt weightless. I could hear ambient music in the background. And as I got into the cloud, there were all these colored lights moving inside of it. And then out of this cloud came Judy. She came right towards me, and she was floating, and she was smiling, and she didn't have any clothes on except for a pair of underpants. And she came up to me, and she looked right in my eyes, and she said to me, "I love you. I had to come and say goodbye. I'm going to be leaving. I'm okay. In fact, I'm very happy. I've never felt better. But I wanted you to know the things you told me about, the fact that we live after we die, that there are aliens on the earth. You were right. There are aliens here." She hugged me. We kind of turned in free fall, and then she said goodbye and backed away from me and moved back into the clouds. And I woke up. I woke up thinking, what the heck was that? I had no idea. To me, it was just a dream. So I got dressed, got in my car, drove down to Marina Del Rey and went to the premiere. The premiere was great. The film was a lot of fun. We had some laughs. But when I got home, there were messages, numerous messages on my machine that Judy had died during the night. And she had died around 6:30, I found out later on. I also found out later on that she was found naked. She had fallen off the couch. She was staying on the couch at her friend's house, and she had fallen off out of the covers onto the floor when they found her, and all she had was a pair of underwear on. That's what the paramedics reported. We tried to revive her. Evidently, she had had a brain aneurysm. Well, first of all, it devastated me. Secondly, it wasn't only a few beats later that I remembered the dream. And I get chills even now, still. It's like never left me. I mean, I'm 72, I was 26 then, and what a wonderful thing she did. She made that effort to come to me. I felt like she must have pulled me out of my body and to share that with me. And that was definitely a gift. And I've never forgot it, because from my perspective, that meant that we did go on after the brain ceased to exist, after the body stopped functioning, that we were spiritual beings inhabiting this body, and that when we passed, we'd go back to the astral plane. And she brought me to it, at least part of it. I don't know what level that was. It was somewhere between here and there. But there's something else. I've had time to think about this. There was something else there. And I truly believe it was the visitors. Maybe they had made it possible for her. I don't know. But when she told me that you were right about the aliens, I had to laugh, really. I mean, it was so crazy, so ridiculous, but it really happened. It was real. It was cliche with the clouds and her floating and everything she said. And yet it really happened. Even the ambient music I could hear in the background. It was like something out of a New Age movie. I knew, and my mother had told me that she had had similar experiences, and one, of course, was with, and I've talked about this before, her grandmother woke her up in the night, sitting on the edge of the bed, telling her that she loved her, and that she had to go, and that she's okay. And to make a long story short, her grandmother disappeared. And then my mom woke up. The sound of the phone ringing in the hallway woke her up. And she heard her mother on the phone crying. And then she came in, she said, your grandmother had just died. Moving on, my friend, my astronomy buddy and I, he took me out that night. He wanted to cheer me up. I was in a pretty bad way, and we went to an Indian restaurant, and we both had curry, and we both wanted the same type, so they brought us a bowl of curry and rice, and we both served ourselves from that bowl. The next day, I was deathly ill. He wasn't sick at all, which left me to believe that the illness I had had something to do with being pulled out of my body and having that whole experience. I was sick for 2-3 weeks after that. And I went and stayed at a friend's house, and she took care of me because, I didn't want to go in the hospital. I just knew I could ride this out, and it was like food poisoning, yet it wasn't. But eventually I recovered, and I'll never forget going home. It was awful. Needless to say, I didn't stay in that house very long. But that was one of the most amazing experiences in my life. I've had plenty, but that one was really something. And again, I believe this has such a connection with the visitors, who they are, who we are, and where we both come from.